Welcome back. Ron here with Miranda and Angie, and in this video we're actually going to talk about creative outreach. And I think this for me is a favorite because if ever there was a mandate biblically, it is to be, I think, effective and creative in the way that we do outreach. We've talked before about how the Bible literally says, and in fact it was Jesus who said, go and compel them to come in. And my concern is sometimes we're not very compelling. We're like, hey, we're over here and you should come, join us. And so just kind of taking it to the street. So I want to challenge us today in the way that we think about how we do that and doing that creatively. Again, thinking outside the box, thinking about things that are going to make people want to come. But this particular kind of event is driven toward a gospel presentation, at least in most cases. I wouldn't say that that has to always be true, because again, sometimes an outreach event can also be to connect people to people. In fact, when we think about Campus Connect and the mission statement really to connect people to people and people to God, if we get either of those done, we've done something worth doing. But nonetheless, we need events that we're strategically planning that are geared to get people to God. And so I want to just chat about that a little bit today. What are some of the different ways that you have in your history and university ministry approach that?
Yeah, well, and I think for me, it's those events, the outreach events we're sharing the gospel or just creating an atmosphere for spiritual conversations to take place.
Sure.
And we talked about in the last video, defining your win. And so, what is your win?
Right.
And how do you prep your team for that so that they know what the win is? And so even if it's that our students know, hey, we're just kind of hanging out, but we really want you to dig in and kind of lead into some spiritual conversations throughout the evening. And so I think having those kinds of things in mind is always really helpful. I think one of my favorite things that I've seen done, and I don't know if I'm jumping ahead of you here, one of my favorite things was a few years ago on a campus in Louisiana, we did a tent. We set a tent up in the quad, just in the grassy area on campus, and we did free spiritual readings.
Whoa, so that's creative.
There were signs all over campus, and then there was a sign on our tent, free spiritual readings. And also the area of Louisiana that we were in has a little bit of voodoo-y type of background, that type of thing, and so it triggers a totally different thought for a lot of people.
Right.
And so then there's a long queue outside the tent because people are like, oh, spiritual readings, who's doing that? You know,
right.
and they're not thinking what we're thinking. And so really part of the whole outreach not even was in the tent, but strictly getting to chat with the people in the queue of, hey, so I noticed you're in line for a free spiritual reading. What drew you to that today?
Right.
Which just opened the door for phenomenal conversations. And then once they got inside, either some of our staff or our really kind of thought through student leaders were sitting with the Bible and then just would chat with people and have spiritual conversations.
Yep.
So obviously not what people were thinking, but we weren't false advertising. We were just reading things spiritually from the Bible and from our angle. But probably one of the most creative outreaches I've gotten to be a part of, and just so fun, really, once you kind of dive into that.
That's cool.
That's a great idea.
I think, too, and you can address this a little bit, Angie, but it's not even just the event, but it is building an outreach-focused ministry.
Yeah.
Like you want that to become the culture of your university student ministry. I know that's true for us in our history with university ministry. It's certainly true for us even in this moment at 828 Church, which is a church we launched 10 months ago. And so when you're new, and every session at the university, you're new. Again, there are new people that come in. Maybe the ministry's not new, but you have a brand new opportunity to impact and engage people. And so it kind of, I think by necessity, causes you to think more creatively about how you're going to reach out, right, to those people. And so you want to build that into the culture of your university ministry. That, wow, we're really about reaching out to people. We're not just kind of a holy huddle. We're not happy with who we have. We love who we have. We're content with what God's doing, but we're always trying to engage others. And so creating that into the culture of university ministry, kind of the history that you and your husband Greg have with university ministry, what were some of the ways that you tried to make that a part of who you were?
One of the things that we did that was, I think, really effective at creating a culture for that was we, at one point, decided that we were going to request that all the people who led life groups in the res halls would knock on doors and go door to door in their res hall or in their section of the res hall, and that they would just ask people, is there anything I can pray with you about? We're going to do a Bible study if you would like to come. and those kinds of things. And getting student leaders to get outside of their comfort zone like that, because it was obviously at first super uncomfortable for people who've never done something like that.
Sure.
And really encouraging them and going with them if necessary at first to get them out of their comfort zone, to talk to people they didn't know, led for some huge opportunities in those rise halls. Because when someone had something that came up, you know, my mom had just gotten in a car accident, and then they would run to that person and knock on the door and say, hey, you know, you've asked me if there's anything for me to pray with you about, and I just got a call that my mom was in a accident. Can you pray with me?
Yeah.
Sure.
And that just led the way for some huge outreach opportunities in the rise halls.
Yeah.
I love that too, because it builds it again. You're creating this cultural fabric in that student ministry, in that community, man. It's just, this is who we are. This is what we do.
Right.
We care about others. We're not just inward focused, but we are looking out in our living space.
Yeah.
Right.
That just builds culture.
And I think building that culture, it sets students up to live that out past the university as well.
Sure.
You know, we talk about that we want to create marketplace missionaries, that when our students leave the university, they're going to be missionaries wherever they land. And I think if we do a great job of building that creative culture, that students are realizing, man, my life really should be an outreach to those that are around me, then they're going to take that into the marketplace as well. And then it's not going to be this weird, I'm in the marketplace and I should do this, but I have no idea. But if we're creating that culture for our students and they've got 3-4 years at the university and they're learning to build great bridges in conversation and they're learning to, you know, offer prayer for people and that type of thing, we really are setting them up to be phenomenal missionaries for the rest of their lives.
That's true. And you mentioned an event that you guys did on campus. And the events are important too, because they give kind of an on-ramp for participation, but ultimately we're hoping for something way past the event. And as you say, to create people who just live on mission and understand outreach is just a part of the daily, everyday interaction that we can have in our world. I was at lunch with someone yesterday, and when the server came to our table, the person said, hey, so we're about to pray for our food. Is there something we can pray for you about? And we do that a lot. It's just kind of become intuitive. It's just kind of second nature. And it isn't always, you know, you don't do it as some sort of I have to, but it's something that you're always just sort of looking and asking God to help you see it that way. And I think when you're building outreach into the culture of church/university ministry, you talk about it. You just talk about the heart that you should have for others. You teach people to pray. God, help us to see today. Help us not to miss others around us. And candidly, leaders, right? I mean, that has to start with us. This has to be a lifestyle that we model. And Angie mentioned a minute ago, even with going into the res halls, that sometimes you had to go with. You know, the old discipleship mantra that I do and you watch, and then we do, and then you do, I watch, and then you do, and someone else watches. And that's how you build culture, whatever it is. And certainly that's true as it relates to outreach. What about this though? Because there are a lot of pre-designed programs. There are things like Evangelism Explosion or various other different things that people have used, and I'm not trying to hate on those, but what about maybe what our approach should be as it relates to just some things, I guess, that we do consistently? I mean, I've been on campus where there were people sent out with surveys, and maybe you've done that. I'll just say candidly, maybe I'll answer my own question. I don't want to set you guys up. But I don't think as a general rule that those are as impactful as someone who just lives life with a heart for others and who lives on mission. But we have to do something.
Right.
So if it's not that, we have to do something to equip people. What do you think about that, and maybe what can that be?
Yeah.
So I think that one of the really good uses of a program like EE or something like that is when I have shared my testimony personally with someone and prayed with them to receive salvation, I can review those points in my head and know that I have adequately presented the gospel message. So there is a use definitely for learning a program, but not then turning around and sharing that program rote, but using that in my testimony presentation and in my story to be able to say, you know I have hit the points that if this person accepted Jesus, they actually understood
Sure.
to the best that I was able to lead them through the gospel. You know, not to just share
Use it as
a
a
list of
script
points,
or whatever like
use
that.
it as a
Right.
script, sure, but to use it as a checklist for myself to know that I'm hitting the major points of the gospel and not in my hurry to get through with, you know, getting them to a point of decision,
Right.
that I'm not leaving something important out, but that I'm
Yeah.
actually hitting all the points.
And when we
Yeah.
think about what the Bible had to say about outreach, again, go and compel them to come in. When we think about that in context, we think about Acts 1:8. Again, I'm always going to be mentioning Acts 1:8, but the Holy Spirit has such a big role in this. Like, we have to understand that when we're even chatting with someone, I might be in a conversation with someone, and so my heart is going to, God, help me understand what to say and how to say it. And I think we need to build that into the culture of our university ministry, that we are people that just believe that God gives us divine appointments. I've said for years, you know, either God gives us more divine appointments than we're seeing or taking advantage of, or he's bad at math.
Yeah.
Because there are a whole lot of people that need somebody to notice them and to care about them, and ultimately to introduce them to who Jesus is.
Yeah.
That often doesn't happen in one moment.
Right.
But we build a bridge of connection and then cross that to some effective outreach. But let's bounce forward quickly and get back to maybe talking about some events, because in the end of it, there are some things we can do as a community that will help us have a broad impact.
Yeah.
And I think that converts to a personal level, but we want to do some things that are broad in their impact as well. So let's talk about maybe some of those ideas.
Yeah. And I think, again, helping our team to know how to do these things is
Yeah.
great. And so I love that we're, you know, building lifestyles and we're building culture of outreach, because again, that internalizes and that becomes a personal thing.
Sure.
And I think so often when we think, oh, let's do outreach events or we need to do outreach, it becomes this almost in the box and
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah, we do that, we check it off the list, and we're done with it.
yeah, and
that's-
Right.
it can be a very harsh thing, and
Yeah.
and we don't want to do that. So I think as we do events as well, we also need to be teaching our students on a personal level. How do you share your testimony
Yeah.
well? And so even having maybe specific training days of, hey guys, let's talk about like
Yeah.
how
Yeah.
do you share your testimony well? Like, what does that even mean?
Mm-hmm.
I know coming in as a varsity student for myself, someone asked me, hey, what's your testimony? And I had grown up in church, known Jesus my whole life kind of thing. And I was like, oh, I don't really have a testimony. Like, I grew up in church. And so it took even a little bit of coaching for me of, not a little bit, it took coaching for me of how do I share my
Sure,
testimony,
sure.
you know? So I think that's important when we're, you know, helping our students in that, and also helping them to look for the bridges in conversation.
Yeah.
I think that's one of my favorite approaches
Yeah.
is I don't need to approach a random guy on the street and just dive directly into, do you know
Right.
Jesus? And I think you're going to hell without him. Because that's actually offensive. So please don't do that. And don't tell your students to do that.
Right.
But if you and I are chatting and you mention something and it legitimately makes me think maybe of something I read recently in the Bible or a
Right.
conversation God and I have been having, that's completely normal. And that's normal and an easy transition to be like, oh,
Sure.
that actually reminds me of whatever, you know.
Yep.
And so I think helping our students to see those
Sure.
things and pick those things out. And that also helps them as we're hosting
Yeah.
events as well. Hey, we're doing this outreach event, guys. Let's make sure that we're good at sharing our testimonies and that we're looking for the good bridges in conversation.
Sure. And I think at that point it becomes supernaturally natural
Yeah.
to do, and that's what we're going for. Again, so think about that. Think creatively about that. Some of the best outreaches we've done were more pseudo-programmatic than they were just straight programmatic. We used to have our kids, our students, I should say, do like, we talked about what is 2x2 evangelism, biblical 2x2 evangelism in 2000, in this case, 15, 16, 17, whenever you're watching this video. It's 2015 today where we're standing, but what does that look like? And so we would say, hey, you know, go to wherever it is that students on your campus have lunch, and maybe a couple of you sit together, but intentionally, usually that shared space. I've been on a lot of your campuses, there's a lot of shared space. So sit where someone else is sitting and just see what God does with that.
Yeah.
You know? Don't go into attack mode,
Yeah.
but go into we care about the people sitting around us mode and see what conversation develops.
Yeah.
Again, build a bridge. Invite someone to go do whatever it is you do. You know, we're going to be going down later to grab some ice cream or something. You should join
Yeah.
us. You know, whatever and however that works out, but do that on purpose.
Yeah.
And I think that's a whole lot of the story of building an effective culture of outreach in your student ministry, but then also being creative with the way that you do that. And then just another thing about that, I remember one of the most impactful outreaches we did when we were on the same campus. You guys were actually interning somewhere else, you came through and we did a dorm, in this case, res outreach, and we did, I think, personality temperament tests.
We did.
Yeah.
We've done res programs where we talked about binge drinking and problems with alcohol. Whatever the need existed in that res hall, because they have maybe a certain quota, a certain number of programs that they need to do as res hall directors or whatever. And so we would say, how can we serve you? How can we be a part of that? So look for those creative opportunities too, and meet whatever that need is, and then walk through whatever door is open to also say, but for me personally, Jesus is the key to making all this work.
Yeah.
And those have always been, like, not us trying to do something completely separate, but us working within the context. And that's true for us presently in church. Again, we're thinking creatively in the context of our city. What are the needs that exist here? How can we help meet those? And in that moment, there is always an opportunity for ministry. It's beautiful.
I think one of my favorite and probably most simplistic outreaches that I've seen done on campus is simply setting up a table and just hanging out, on campus, in the middle of campus all day, and just chat with students.
That's worked.
I think my favorite has been you take a whiteboard and you have a question of the day. Very simple, very easy.
Yeah.
And you can put questions on there that are not directly spiritual, but depending on someone's answer, could give you a very easy bridge into spiritual conversation.
Sure.
So I know we've done many times, what's one thing you want to do before you die? And it just, again, sometimes maybe it's not going to open the door to conversation. It's going to be a very, blunt end of story kind of thing. But often you see people's responses and it's like, oh, well, hey, let's chat about that. Do you have a minute? And you can take the bridge into a spiritual conversation. Or one of my favorites was also, if you could only listen to one song for the rest of your life, what would it be?
Yeah.
Because what people pick says a lot. And if you're looking for those things, like you mentioned, sit in the dining hall and look for the opportunities and stuff like that. If you've got your eyes open, then you can find the ways to step into those conversations.
Sure.
And so very simple, very easy, but very effective often, something that we can do right in the middle of campus.
Yeah. I think one of the major things that has to be remembered is that you, as the leaders, you've got to coach your people. You've got to coach your students. You've got to coach the student leaders into this. I remember one time when I was having like a one-on-one meeting with a girl who was one of our student leaders, and we were in a shared space, and sitting there were some other people, and they were talking about, what do you have to do to get to heaven? And they're having this whole conversation at their end of the table about what you have to do to get to heaven. And we're having a conversation, and all of a sudden the Holy Spirit just tapped me like, you are missing an opportunity to model for her how to build a bridge into this. And so I just slid down the table and said, hey, you guys are talking about how to get to heaven. Can we talk about that with you? Because that's super interesting.
Yeah.
And so we had this great conversation that centered around that. And so it was just this amazing time of training that happened for her. And I think that it's really important for leaders to be willing to do that and to model that.
Yeah.
And when we use the word evangelism, we often intimidate people, but this word outreach, I mean, it is God, and it is gospel, and it is for everyone. And just a quick plug, I mean, we literally created a university student ministry tool called Eyewitness. I know some of our friends in South Africa have used it. It's 7 videos that talk about, it's just a personal equipping tool, and it's great for student leader conversations or even life group and that kind of thing. I wouldn't use it where you might have people who've only recently come to your community, but it is a great leadership training tool. And there are some other tools out there that are really good too, but it really is about helping maybe disarm the devil and the lie that he's told, because the worst thing we could do in this is nothing.
Right.
But only slightly less hurtful or harmful than nothing is to do this poorly or the wrong way, to try to debate someone into conversion or those kinds of things. So just hitting the heart of God for how to love people and to reach out to people is powerful, and it's important, and we got to do it.
Yeah. So we want to build that culture of creative outreach and living the lifestyle on mission and reaching those that are around us.
Sounds good. Go for it.